All right, so let's wrap up the semester with BS then. Again, I mentioned that tied to our notion of philosophy is that philosophy, when done well, is an attempt to provide well-reasoned, informed, well-reasoned arguments to support positions on these non-empirical issues, right? So that presupposes that there's some distinction between good and bad arguments, right? I already kind of gave you a pretty solid example of this already. Some people are tempted by relativism when it comes to arguments, but I think by now it should be clear to us all that one of the following arguments is a good argument and one of the following arguments is a bad argument. All men are mortal, Socrates is a man, therefore Socrates is mortal, versus all men are mortal, Socrates is a man, therefore Socrates likes cheese. Those arguments aren't both good arguments, right? One of them has a fallacy in it, the other one's does not. So it looks like that's a plausible distinction, right? But we've also encountered various challenges to that distinction along the way here. In Klosowski, they talked about sophism. Sophism is, kind of a famous line about sophism is that sophists take the stronger argument and make it look weaker, and the weaker argument and make it look stronger. It looks like they're just engaged in straw man everything, right? Relativism, truthiness, and gut thinking are tempting, according to Johnson, because philosophy is difficult to sort through all these arguments and worry about all these sorts of errors. So it's tempting to just take the easy way out and say everything is relative, but of course we see how that ran into problems, or just to rely on truthiness and gut thinking, both of which have some problems we've seen. Johnson used the law of non-contradiction to kind of talk about problems with each of those. Then we worried about an objection to the possibility of objectivity in philosophy with the philosophical non-objectivism and the baseline argument for that. And then today we're going to add to that with BS. So again, kind of what all these things have in common is that they're a challenger trying to, it questions the idea of whether you could have a difference between a legitimate and an illegitimate argument. We need to worry about challenges to our views, obviously, but that presupposes, again, that there's a way of sorting that stuff out as opposed to everything just being BS. Everybody good so far? Questions? So I like this essay by Cohen. I put on Moodle for you, Frankfurt, both Frankfurt's essay that you were supposed to read for today, and then also I put on Moodle down at the bottom the other secondary piece that I'm going to draw on for a criticism of Frankfurt today. So you got both sources. I put them on panels on a slide so they'd be easier for us to look at in class, but you've got the primary sources for them there on Moodle. So, and one of the reasons why I like this piece is partly just because I like to say BS. The second reason is more important, and it's because it gives us another example of what doing philosophy is. We've already seen one example with that Johnson article in the Doing Philosophy Colbert style. Well, here we see Frankfurt take up the task of doing philosophy with regard to BS. And so we've talked about the Socratic method before, and I mentioned that one of our definitions of philosophy was conceptual engineering, which came from Blackburn. Add that one here. It's his way of talking about philosophy. When we talk about philosophy as the guard against the bewitchment of our intelligence by means of language, right? By the means of rhetoric in that negative sense of the term, or sophism, right? And talked about the Socratic method as a way of getting started on that. Well, the Socratic method begins with what is blank question, where the blank is, usually a concept, rather than like a natural phenomenon. So like, what is knowledge, or what is truth, or what is beauty, or what is justice? Here it's what is BS, all right? And then there's like this really bad philosophy joke to be told here, so I'll go ahead and tell it. And philosophers love to ask what is blank questions, but if you show up to philosophy class and it's like a question like what is knowledge, and you think, oh, I just need to go to the consult the dictionary to find out the answer to that, you miss the point, right? Because they're starting with the dictionary definition, the common usage definition, and finding some shortcoming with that, and then developing a more detailed definition, like a stipulative or a precising definition, as opposed to a lexical definition, the dictionary definition, or the common usage definition. So that's what we see Frankfurt up to. He's doing a little bit of conceptual engineering with this notion of BS. And he mentions Wittgenstein in it, so it's worth returning to this. Again, philosophy is the battle against bewitchment by our intelligence by means of language, or for our purposes today, philosophy is the battle against the bewitchments of our intelligence by means of BS. Right? But then that means we need to know what BS is. Right? So let's take a look at a couple of passages from Frankfurt's essay. He starts out by talking about this notable feature of our culture, that there's so much BS. He talks about how people generally act like they're really good at identifying BS, but then also that we lack any clear account of what BS is. So that's why he takes up this task. He wrote a sequel to this called On Truth, right? They're both like really little short essays that they published as books. So here's Frankfurt. He did pass away this year. And what he does is he starts with the Oxford English Dictionary definition of BS, finds it inadequate, and then turns to other sources to begin for insights to then develop his own account of BS, right? If you were writing a philosophy paper, you'd be expected to do something very similar to that, right? To identify a problem, see what other people have said about that problem, find some shortcoming or insight from it, and then develop it further, right? Is, of course, making your own argument. So that's what he does too here. He says, nevertheless, I do not believe that Blackburn's account of humbug, that's where the second thing that he turns to as a source, adequately or accurately grasps the essential character of BS. So that idea of essential character or the essence of BS, that's not an innocent term in philosophy. It usually denotes something like literally an essence, an unchanging set of conditions that make a thing what it is, right? Sometimes you'll hear philosophers use more logical language in this regard and talk about necessary and sufficient conditions. So, for example, being a rose is a sufficient condition for being a flower, right? Everybody say it's true, right? But being a rose is not a necessary condition for being a flower. Why is that? There's more than one type of flower, so I could be a daisy and still be, so being a rose is a sufficient but not necessary condition for being a flower. If we want to find out what the necessary and sufficient conditions for being a flower are, then we got to specify a bunch more than just that. We have to identify what all roses, despite their physical differences, shares in it, which seems like the idea or essence of floweriness. Sometimes you do this in philosophy class with really dumb objects like chairs. There's a meme that goes around, well, maybe not in your social media circles, but in mine. And it's like this thing where it's like this white-looking monkey, like holding his hand up. I forget what the name of the actual meme.
I know.
But you know the one I'm talking about? And it says, 4 hours of philosophy this week, we still don't know what a chair is, right? And it's because your philosophy professor is going to walk in and say, all right, y'all think y'all know what chairs are. Is that a chair? Y'all say, yeah. Is that a chair? And you all say, yeah. Do they look the same? No. So what are the necessary and sufficient conditions of being a chair? Well, it has to support weight, right? Well, there's other things that support weight that aren't chairs. So now we got a problem, right? You see how quickly it gets out of hand. Looking for the necessary and sufficient conditions of a chair. Well, his idea that he's capturing the essence of BS means that he's got to give us a complete account of BS and can't leave anything out, right? So that's why I'm harping on this essential character of BS. There's already a bit of a tension in his essay because he starts off by saying, he starts off with like a weaker stance. He starts off with like, I'm going to give the beginnings of an account of BS. But then he turns to this talk of essences, which looks like he's making a much stronger claim than just giving us a first attempt at an account of BS, right? So, and again, he's picked up on Max Black's notion of humbug as a way of getting started. He says, it's correct to say of BS, as he says of humbug, that that it is short of lying, right? So it's not quite a lie, and that the chose to perpetuate it misrepresent themselves in a certain way. So it's not quite a lie, but it involves misrepresentation. Okay? That's what he thinks those two features get at. But Black's account of those two features is off the mark. He's right about what the features are, but his account of them is inadequate, he says. He says, I shall next attempt to develop, by considering some biographical material pertaining to Wittgenstein, a preliminary but more accurately focused appreciation of just what the central characteristics of BS are. Wittgenstein once said that the following bit of verse by Longfellow could serve as a motto. In the elder days of art, builders wrought with greatest care each minute and unseen part, for the gods are everywhere. What the hell is that supposed to mean? Right? This is important to Wittgenstein because, whether justifiably or not, he's talking about Pascal and what someone has said that seems like kind of like he's used the example of what it feels of someone saying, I feel like a run over dog. Right? So none of us know what it feels like to be a what? A dog. We can probably imagine that being a run over dog doesn't feel good. But beyond that, who knows what being a run over dog is? So what are we to make of the speech of that? It looks like it's purporting to represent a state of affairs, honestly, right? So he says, what's important to Wittgenstein is because whether justifiably or not, he takes what she says seriously as a statement purporting to give information, an informative description of the way she feels, right? Not a description of something else, but a description of what? What they're up to, right? Their own mental states. He construes her as engaged in an activity to which the distinction between what is true and what is false is crucial, and yet as taking no interest in whether what she says is true or false. This is a really important point for his account of BS. She's not concerned with the truth value of what she says. When philosophers use truth value, they mean either true or false. That's a truth value of a statement. Got two options. This person, however, is not concerned with whether or not what they say is true or false. Right? That is why she cannot be regarded as lying, for she does not presume that she knows the truth and therefore cannot be deliberately promulgating a proposition that she presumes to be false. Her statement is grounded neither in the belief that it is true, nor, as a lie must be, in a belief that it is not true. Right? So to tell a lie here is not simply to repeat a falsehood that you believe to be true, right? It's to say something other than what you believe to be the case. Whether it's true or not, it's saying the opposite of what you believe to be the case. So it's just this lack of connection to a concern with truth, this indifference to how things are, that I regard as the essence of BS. So what is BS? It is being unconcerned with whether what you say is accurate or not. It's not being concerned with the truth or falsity of it at all. it does seem that BSing, and notice that what he does here, and this would be a point that our next author takes issue with, is that Frankfurt slips between talking about BS kind of as a thing and BSing as a verb, right, as an activity. So it does seem that BSing involves a kind of bluff. It's closer to bluffing, surely, than to telling a lie. But what is implied concerning its nature by the fact that it is more like the former than it is like the latter? Just what is the relevant difference here between a bluff and a lie? Lying and bluffing are both modes of misrepresentation or deception. Now, the concept most central to the distinctive nature of a lie is that of falsity. The liar is essentially someone who deliberately, right, so on purpose, promulgates a falsehood. Bluffing, too, is typically devoted to conveying something false. Unlike plain lying, however, it is more especially a matter of not falsity, but of fakery. It's like a bull session, right? You're joking around with your friends and you're saying stuff, but nobody really takes you to be intending to accurately display things, but rather recognizes your hyperbolic language as part of a joke or something like that, right? So unlike plain lying, however, it's more especially a matter of not falsity, but of fakery. This is what accounts for the nearness to BS. For the essence of BS is not that it is false, but that it's phony. All right. Not just false, but phony. What BS essentially misrepresents is neither a state of affairs to which it refers, nor the beliefs of the speaker concerning the state of affairs. Those are what lies misrepresent by virtue of being false. Since the BS need not be false, it differs from lies in its misrepresentation of intent. The BSer may not deceive us, or even intend to do. Think of the bull session again. Either about the facts or what he takes to be the facts. What he does necessarily attempt to deceive us about is his enterprise. His only indisputably distinctive character is that in a certain way, the BSer misrepresents what he is up to. So here's the crux of the distinction between the BSer and the liar. Both he and the liar represent themselves falsely as endeavoring. Right? The success of each depends upon deceiving us about that. But the fact about himself that the liar hides is what he is attempting to lead us away from a correct apprehension of reality. We are not to know that he wants us to believe something he supposes to be false. The fact about himself that he is a BSer, that the BSer hides, on the other hand, is that the truth values of his statements are of no central interest to him at all. What we are not to understand about the BSer is that his intention is neither to report the truth nor to conceal it. This does not mean that his speech is anarchically impulsive or nonsensical, right? But that the mode of guiding and controlling it is unconcerned with how things about which he speaks truly are. So liars are responding to the truth, and at least in that so much respectful of what is true or not. They're not indifferent to the truth. They have to show difference to it in order to say something other than the truth. The BSer is indifferent to the truth or falsity of their claims. So it's impossible for someone to lie unless they think they know the truth. Producing BS requires no such conviction. A person who lies is thereby responding to the truth, and to that, at least minimal extent, respectful of it. When an honest man speaks, he says what he believes to be true. And for the liar, it is correspondingly indispensable that he considers his statements to be false. For the BSer, however, all bets are off. He's neither on the side of the true nor on the side of the false. His eye is not on the facts at all, as the eyes of the honest man and the eyes of the liar are, except insofar as it may be pertinent to his interest in getting away with what he says. He does not care whether the things he says describe reality correctly. He just picks them out or makes them up to suit his purpose. So BS has to do with the mental state of the speaker in regard to in regard to their attitude about like what they're saying, right? right? They're simply not concerned with whether or not what they say is true or false. It's just instrumental to them to try and get away with what they say. So distinct from a lie in that regard. Questions about this account of BS? So one thing that philosophers have to worry about, is this philosophical BS or not? Yeah.
Could you go into more depth about the difference between fakery and falsehood?
Yeah, well, fakeries, they don't. Fakery is it's the same thing, disconnection with the truth. So a phony is just making stuff up to get away with what they want and isn't really concerned with whether it's true or false. So that's fakery, right? As opposed to falsity, which is acknowledging what I think to be true and then saying something otherwise. So it's still connected. And it's minimally respectful of the truth, but what was true or false mattered to the lie in a way that doesn't matter to the BS. I have a favorite everyday example that occurs of BS that occurs to me that happens often in my life as an instructor. Guess what it is? People that tell me they read the assignment when they only skimmed it. They want me to tell them what I want them to know, right? I studied it and I don't understand. Well, what didn't you understand? All of it. They didn't read, right? Reading and studying produces informed confusion, not complete and utter ignorance, right? Scholastic BS. Right. Here's Cohen. Other questions, right? So notice what Frankfurt looks like he's trying to do. He's trying to establish the necessary, by claiming that we got the essence of BS here. It looks like he's made a very strong claim, right? It's supposed to capture any instance of BS, right? Everybody on board with that? Again, his account has to do with the activity of producing BS, right? And the mental state of the person who does so. Here's AG Cohen, who criticizes this account of BS, right? Again, I'm going to pull out just some key passages here. I put the whole article on Moodle for you. It's down at the bottom. Most of what I'm drawing out of here is like around pages 5 and 6 from it. So I'm just harping on this one little thing here, right where he identifies the limitation of Frankfurt's account, right? So it's a limitation of Frankfurt's account, as we shall see, that he took for granted that the bull wears the semantic trousers. The bull is the one that produces what? Bullshit, right? So it's about the speaker and their activity. Right. He's therefore focused only on one kind of BS only, and he did not address another equally interesting and academically more significant kind. So, he's said he's identified the essence of BS, but he's left something out. Right? He didn't get the necessary and sufficient conditions. Right? BS is insincere talk or writing is indeed what it is because it is the product of something like bluffing. But talking nonsense is what it is because of the character of its output, and nonsense is not nonsense because of the nonsense talker's mental state. So he's taken issue with this account that BS is comprised of only the speaker's mental states. It's going to have to do with what is produced as well, not just the mental state of the producer. Frankfurt very surprisingly says that the essence of BS is a lack of connection to a concern with the truth. Indifference to how things really are, where that indifference is concealed by the speaker. It's the word essence here that surprises me. It seemed to be implied by Frankfurt's preliminary remark that the term BS, considered comprehensively, denotes no one thing whose essence one might try to specify. And Frankfurt had not in the interim indicated a particular region of BS whose BS might perhaps be identified by that essence. So he's got one account of it, and maybe one account of that aspect of BS, but not a comprehensive account of BS. We're going to raise the question of whether a comprehensive account is possible here. Is BS a unified phenomenon, unified by the speaker's mental state? Right? So Frankfurt, should have submitted his indifference to truth thesis as an attempt to characterize at least one interesting kind of BS, whether or not there are other interesting kinds of it. Let us assess his thesis as such and not with the ambitiously generalizing status he assigns to it, but as an attempt to characterize one kind of BS, and in particular, an activity-centered kind of BS. I shall return to the distinct BS, ex condum, which corresponds to OED definition 1. So again, both of them are starting with this lexical definition. It's the Oxford English Dictionary. Lexical definition, dictionary definition, common usage, as opposed to like specialized usage of terms. What we're developing here is a specialized or specific account of BS, right? And in that definition, he points out that, like, look, part of the definition looks like what Frankfurt's talking about, and another part of the definition looks like what I'm talking about. If what Frankfurt does is describe the essence, then his part should cover both of those, not just one. So here's his counterexample. Again, this is pages 5 and 6 in this other article. So a person who speaks with Frankfurtian indifference to the truth might do so, yet happen to say something true. And at least in one sense of the term, the one that interests me, what he says then could not then be BS. In other words, because they were saying something, the product was truthful, right? And oppositely, an honest person might read some BS that a Frankfurt BSer wrote, believe it to be truth, and affirm it. When that honest person utters that BS, she's not showing a disregard for the truth. So it is neither necessary nor sufficient for every kind of BS that it should be produced by one who is informed by indifference to truth, or indeed by any other distinctive mental state. He just gave a counterexample to Frankfurt, right? One that shows that we still want to call this stuff BS, but it doesn't have the characteristic that Frankfurt has pointed out as essential to BS. So the honest follower or the honest, confused producer of BS may or may not count as a BSer, but she is certainly honest, and she certainly utters one kind of BS. There exists BS as a feature of utterances that does not qualify as BS by virtue of the intentional state of the utterance's producer, that's Frankfurt, although any state may, of course, causally explain why the BS is there, and or why what's there is BS. But then, what is this other feature of utterances that makes them BS? So what is that feature? One thing it can be, at least as a first approximation, is what the EOD calls it, to wit, nonsense. But what particularly interests me is a certain variety of nonsense, namely that which is found in discourse that is by its nature unclarifiable. Discourse that is not only obscure, but which cannot be rendered unobscure. In other words, it can't be clarified. It purports to make some graspable point, but that point can't be articulated, right? So where any apparent success in rendering it unobscure creates something that isn't recognizable as a version of what is said, of what was originally said, is what he's getting at there. That is why it is frequently an appropriate response to a charge of BS to set about trying to clarify what was said. So think of everyday conversations you have. Somebody says something you said was BS, and then the next response is to try to clarify it in a way that shows it's not BS. Right? So something is unclarifiable if and only if it cannot be made clear, but I shall not try to say what clear means in this essay. He says there's lots of different varieties of that. Here's an example, the meaning of Wittgenstein's, if a lion could speak, we would not understand him. is in one way perfectly clear, right? It's a grammatically correct sentence. You understand all the individual words that are used in it. But it might nevertheless be judged obscure and unclarifiably obscure by one who doubts that it carries, in context, a graspable point. That is also the unclarity of why one's statement should be taken to lend credence to another statement. And there are no doubt other pertinent unclarities too. He's gesturing in the idea that there can't be, in essence here, there's just family resemblances. So although I forswear a definition of clarity, I can offer a sufficient condition of it. It is that adding or subtracting, if it has one, a negation sign from the text makes no difference to its level of plausibility. No force in a statement that has been grasped, if its punitive grasper would react no differently to its negation from how he reacts to its original statement. So in other words, either denying or affirming, it makes no difference to anybody, because it's ungraspable, right? The deliberate BS published by Alan Sokal, who is an academic hoax article. You can read about the Sokal hoax on the internet if you want. No doubt comes out as an unclarifiable unclarity by that criterion. Note that this test does not apply to the different sorts of BS reviewed a couple of paragraphs back, and being merely a sufficient condition of unclarifiable unclarity, it does recognize all cases of the latter either. So we get two accounts of BS. We get Frankfurt's theory and we get Cohen's theory. Frankfurt's theory is supposed to be about everyday discourse. Cohen's theory is about academic BS. He thinks there's a certain kind of BS and unclarifiable, an obscurantism that is persistent in certain areas of philosophy. He was picking on contemporary French, a certain group of contemporary French scholars. And then, what do those correspond to in the OED? Frankfurt's the insincere talk. It's about the activity and the speaker's mentality. Its essence is indifference to truth. But Cohen is worried about the output independent of the speaker's mental state. And that output, what's significant about that is that it can't be clarified. It can't be rendered into a graspable point, even if we deny it or affirm it. So according to Cohen, there's not a unified account of BS. There are varieties of BS, and what's important about the varieties, what makes them varieties of one thing, is their unclarifiable unclarity. They can't be it's discourse that can't be rendered sensible. So he challenges the idea that there's an essence of it. All right, so there's our two theories of BS. We got to worry about both of them, and of course, the one that's most applicable to us is, some of this philosophy stuff, unclarifiable or not, right? In many ways, what we've been doing this last part, or this first part of the class, is, developing our BS detectors, right? If the arguments are nonsensical, that are contradictory, it looks like we have reason to think that in terms of their output, they are BS, right? And that might cause us to wonder whether or not the person uttering them is concerned with the truth at all. All right, so there's a little bit of discourse on BS. To finish up the material for this chapter, or not this chapter, this unit, what kinds of questions do you all have? Anybody have questions about argument forms or fallacies?
I have something. Earlier, you talked about someone asked about bakery policy.
Yeah.
So, with bakery, is there no truth involved? Like, do you not know the truth?
Fakers, they don't care. That's the indifference. For Frankfurt. Yeah.
Well, the BS essay be covered on the test?
Everything that's on assigned readings is fair game on the exam. Cohen is fair game on the exam. So covered that. Yeah. Other questions about any of the stuff we've covered up to this point in the semester? We're going to be using this stuff from here on out. Yeah.
Could you explain self-defeating just a little bit more?
Self-defeating violates the law of non-contradiction. So self-defeating, self-contradictory, self-refuting, self-referentially incoherent are all different ways of saying the same thing. It violates the law of non-contradiction. So any theory that required so if in order, let me how to say this. So if a theory requires the truth of a contradiction, then that theory has to be false, right? Because contradictions can't be true. So self-contradiction.
So like that one
I'm sorry?
that one discourse where the girl's saying that philosophy is not empirical, therefore philosophy is.
There was a premise in there that was self-defeating. The relativism, the version of relativism that we looked at, those were self-defeating. Yeah. So statements like, well, statements that issue a criteria or a standard, where that standard or criteria applies to the statement of it, that criteria itself. So there's the self-referential part, and then the violation of the law of non-contradiction. So yeah, one of the three main types of basic errors that could occur in an argument. Yeah.
Could you talk about the last study question for this one? It was, what is Frankfurt's view on skepticism about the very idea of truth?
Uh-huh. Well, so I'm not going to answer it if it's a reading question because it was there for you to do it, but it's at the end of the essay.
Okay.
Yeah. So those reading questions I put up at the top of them that I won't answer them for you. That's stuff to help you get through it. So yeah, but it's at the end of Frankfurt's essay. He takes it for granted that he didn't really need to write a sequel, but then because there was so much BS, he took it as necessary to have to write a sequel. Other questions about fallacies? Going to ask some questions about fallacies, argument forms, and then analyzing arguments. So we haven't covered a whole bunch of philosophical arguments so far, but we did cover a few here, and we covered them there. So those were basically, where the arguments were about the nature of truth and stuff like that. Those are basically epistemological issues as well. What's the nature of objective truth? Must it be empirical or not? Those are, kind of epistemology issues. And then the rest of the semester, we'll get more heavily into, skepticism about the very idea of truth, conspiracy theories. And both of them there, we'll see a similar move. First, like, what do you mean by knowledge, right? And then when can we have it and when can we not? Or, what counts as a conspiracy theory? Is it just two people doing shit in secret? Or is conspiracy theory something that is like inherently flawed? Stuff like that. All right, folks, well, I'll stick around till the end of class time if people have questions. Otherwise, y'all go study carefully, and I will see y'all on Thursday. Come here first. Grab her for me. Come here and I'll show you where it is. Yeah. I'm not trying to put you off, but I want you to. I don't want to do people studying for them,
yeah,
right?
No, I get
because
it.
it's one of the things that there's just been a problem with after the pandemic and stuff. So, but I want to show you where it is. First, let me get to the right place. Those are the last two paragraphs.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Is there like an objective truth to what is a charity?
I mean, that makes sense if you want to be like,
An objective truth. Well, yeah, I think there's an objective truth. The question is whether that's complete truth. Maybe that's what your real question is. Yeah. So that's much harder than is there an objective truth to what a chair is? Because, so it gets to, I didn't do this semester. Sometimes I put this epilogue up from another book. It's about philosophical methods. So I'll mention it to you because it gets right here. So there's Socrates, and he thinks we can identify an essence of everything, and pin down the essence of a chair. And then there's a whole other school of philosophy that says, we can't do that. Well, the best we can do is family resemblances. And so that means picking out chair-like features that they all share in, but that you couldn't ever define the necessary and sufficient conditions of certain things, like maybe even chair. Right. So, and Aristotle pointed this out as a critique of Plato's. It's called the third man argument. So I'll look up the third man argument to get started on that. And if you want like the readings on those two different schools, or two different, it's more about philosophical methodology, shoot me an email and I'll send it to you. Okay. All right. Yeah, you bet.
Yeah, I just needed some clarity. So basically the essential difference between Frankfurt and Cohen is that Frankfurt's take on BS is it depends on the mental state of the BSer, and Cohen's is what it produces.
The product, independent of their mental state.
Okay.
That's right. So it's not about intent.
Oh,
Okay,
okay. Thank you.
You bet, man.
I just had a general question, so I came in kind of late. So we should be studying the study questions, all the reading assignments, and just the...
I would do the practice exercise. I would go back over the practice exercises from class. I would go back over and there are some practice activities in the logic stuff on Moodle.
Okay.
I would make sure and do that. And then I would take, if you haven't done it already, I would do one attempt at the practice exam, see what you mess up on,
Exactly.
go study that stuff, and then go take it again.
Okay.
So that would be like my final step of preparation.
Mm-hmm. Because I transferred into your class like 2 weeks late, so I kind of missed the first 2 weeks of the class. So I've been like scrambling to catch up.
So if you haven't done it already, down at the bottom of the Moodle pages, there's like a review lesson. And those are old video lectures from a previous version of the class. So you can go back and review that stuff there as well.
Okay, but for like the handouts that y'all did y'all do the handouts in the first like couple weeks?
Couple weeks we did. If you want, I'm about to walk over to my office and I can give them to you.
Oh, really?
So that way you would at least have them and you could get like notes from a classmate about what the answers are.
Okay.
It's just that we won't have time for me to do that with you.
Okay.
I'm in 210B codes. If you want to walk right across the quad over there, I'll meet you over there as soon as I clean up in here.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Uh-huh. Daniel, do you have any questions about anything?
I don't think so. I guess actually on the test day, here, do you want me to like sit anywhere specific or walk around?
It would be probably best if, because it will be more full in here than ever before on test day. So if there's a chair, I think there's another one up there. So we'll kind of hang out up front and walk around the perimeter every once in a while and just kind of keep an eye on them. Usually your presence and then knowing you're walking around is enough to deter cheaters. Then, if you see something there's lots of behavior that is kind of consistent with cheating that you kind of pick up on over the years of being in the classroom. But that it's consistent with cheating, but that might not be cheating. So people, they look around inadvertently, when they're thinking, right? They might not even be realizing that they're staring at the other person's paper. So if it happens once, don't worry about it. If they keep going back, then we start worrying about it. And so if something like that were to happen, I would walk up and say, you need to keep and just tell them you need to look. It looks, I'm not saying you are, but it looks like it. Yeah, so you need to make sure you keep your eyes on your paper and also tell the person that they're looking at to kind of shield their stuff. And if something were to really happen, then, if you notice it, you can text me or tell me up here under the ear, and then I'll take care of it. It's better if the instructor of record addresses that rather than the teaching assistant. Don't want you to have to do something like that the first time. And again, while that's going on, I like to have, if I do have to talk with somebody, it's good for, on test day, then you have to kind of proctor while I've got them out in the hall or talking to them. And then after that, like, it'd be a good idea for like kind of us to debrief real quickly. So just if you did ever have your own class or were proctoring by yourself, what would you need to do in order to make sure you're on the right side of that accusation? Because the last thing we want to do is, falsely accuse people.